The Provisional IRA mounted an attack on an RUC police station in Loughgall, County Armagh, driving a bomb into the base in a digger and demolishing much of it, but the plan had been discovered and a group of SAS soldiers had set up an ambush and opened fire, killing all 8 of the IRA men and one unfortunate civilian who drove into the firing line. The PIRA claimed that some of its men had been executed by the British soldiers while helpless, and while an investigation by the British authorities found no grounds for prosecution, this hardly satisfied those in the Republican community. In Italy, Napoli won the Serie A title for the first time in the club's history, thanks in part to the efforts of their record signing Diego Maradona. They would go on in a couple of weeks to also win the Coppa Italia, meaning that the beaten finalists Atalanta would also qualify for European football despite being relegated. It was the first time a club from mainland southern Italy had ever won the Scudetto and guaranteed Maradona an iconic status in the region that he retains to this day. Margaret Thatcher called a general election to be held in 1 month's time. The Conservatives were riding high in the polls as the British economy seemed finally to be recovering and unemployment fell to under 3 million for the first time since 1981. But many felt that Labour would do much better than previously under the charismatic orator Neil Kinnock. On Grand Prix weekend, Wembley saw an upset as Coventry City beat Tottenham Hotspur 3-2 in the 106th FA Cup final. Coventry's second goal was a classic, a diving header by Keith Houchen, signed from lowly York City at the start of the season. The match went to extra time, where the deciding goal was scored by Gary Mabbott into his own net. In the stands was Ken Tyrrell, a lifelong Spurs fan who flew over from Belgium and skipped Saturday qualifying to be there. And on race day itself, the USS Stark, an American frigate patrolling the Persian Gulf, was hit by 2 Exocet anti-ship missiles, killing 37 sailors and injuring 21 more. The Reagan administration was quick to blame Iran, but it transpired the missiles had in fact been fired from an Iraqi Mirage fighter. It has never been established if the Iraqi pilot was operating under orders, and if so, whose, while the captain, executive officer and tactical action officer of the Stark were reprimanded by the US Navy for failing to defend the ship adequately. While all that was happening, the F1 teams arrived at Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix, with all eyes on Nelson Piquet after his horrific crash at Imola. With Ozella back down to a single car entry, it was 26 cars once more, and the weather at Spa was predictably unpredictable, with rain, sun and even hail at one point over practice and qualifying periods. Some, including Lola designer Ralph Bellamy, were hoping that rain would prove a great leveller between the turbo and non-turbo cars.
No, I don't think it'll be a disadvantage at all if the race is held under these sort of conditions, because the turbo cars have an excess of power which they can't use, whereas we can certainly use all the power that we have.
René Arnoux had been in the news for all the wrong reasons, picking up a driving ban in France after being clocked at 151 miles an hour on the autoroute. His Ligier, as well as that of teammate Ghinzani, would be sporting new suspension configurations to hopefully solve the issues both drivers had had at Imola. And the little AGS team had 2 of their nose cones stolen over the weekend, while driver Pascal Fabre was handed a reprimand and a fine for insufficient use of his mirrors. One of his fellow drivers was heard to mutter darkly that it was a shame that Pascal hadn't been stolen too. And the Lotus team gave the BBC some rare access to their pit car radio system as Senna talked to Peter Waugh during his practice laps as the rain came and went.
Go for it. Only this bit here is wet, all the rest is dry, but it's coming some light rain. I can feel it, so you have to go for it.
I've already told them, Ayrton. More important, Prost has just left the pits with dry tyres.
Okay, but it's very dangerous at the moment. Dry tires is very dangerous. Around the pit area, down the hill with the quick gases, it's very, very dangerous. Too much water and also oil.
The Ferraris were first and third in the wet on Friday, but when the track dried overnight, normal service was resumed, with Nigel Mansell taking his second pole of the year and his 6th overall, alongside and just a smidge under 1.4 seconds faster than his teammate Nelson Piquet. Senna was third, just a 10th behind his countryman, and then the Ferraris were 4th and 5th, with Prost 6th in the McLaren. The Benettons sandwiched Patrese, hoping for a replay of his Imola heroics with better results this time, and Johansson made up the top 10, with the Arrows twins just behind. Nannini went well in the Minardi to outqualify Nakajima's Lotus and both Ligiers, and Capelli was top of the non-turbo heap, with Alex Caffey bringing up the rear in the allegedly turbocharged Azella, some 20 seconds off the pole time and nearly 5 seconds off Fabre's AGS. The sun was out and the track was dry, though there were clouds on the horizon, as the cars lined up for the start on Sunday afternoon, hoping to avoid a repeat of last year's first turn chaos. The lights went out and Mansell got a flawless start, with Senna taking second and holding the inside line on La Source to deny Piquet. There was a little jostling at the back as Arnoux rubbed wheels with De Cesaris, but it looked as if it was an otherwise clean start as Mansell charged down to Eau Rouge, then uphill to the Kemmel kink. Arnoux' suspension had, it turned out, not survived his contact with De Cesaris, while as the leaders came through to finish lap 1, someone was missing. Berger was no longer fourth. The cameras picked him up at the back of the straight. He'd had a spin coming out of the bus stop chicane and collected Boutsen. While the cameras were watching the local boy climb out, Streff had an almighty off at Eau Rouge and was immediately T-boned by Palmer in the other Tyrrell. Streff's car was completely demolished, ending up in two halves on the roadway as Philippe Alliot pulled over to see if he could render assistance, and the race was black flagged. Fortunately, Alliot's help wasn't needed, as both Tyrrell drivers climbed out of their cockpits and were pronounced fit to race. Only there was only one spare Tyrrell, of course, which was given to Streff, who'd qualified one place better. With a full restart, it was a reprieve too for Berger, Boutsen, De Cesaris and Arnoux, who would all switch to their spare cars, leaving the unfortunate Palmer the only man without a ride, as they all lined up once more, just about half an hour after the first start. So off they went again, and again Senna dived in front of Piquet. Only this time he got in front of Mansell as well, taking the lead as the 25 cars thundered down towards La Source, with Alboreto slotting in third. Mansell was hanging closely on Senna's gearbox as they went round lap 1, and coming into Les Fagnes he pulled out and had a go. Senna took the slippery inside line and slithered a little, there was contact, and both cars went sliding off into the gravel, leaving Piquet in the lead with Alboreto right behind. The Lotus was stuck fast, but Mansell managed to keep his Williams running and rejoined some way back. So at the end of lap 1 of 43, Piquet led Alboreto, Prost, Boutsen, Berger, Fabi, Patrese, Johansson and Cheever, as Warwick bullied his way past De Cesaris at La Source. It was fated not to be Berger's weekend. A spectacular plume of smoke in the bus stop chicane at the end of lap 2 announced another broken Ferrari engine, just in time for the Austrian to pull into the pit lane. One Ferrari down, and the other was about 1.5 seconds behind Piquet, and its driver, Michele Alboreto, was hoping to end Ferrari's 25-race win drought before it became 26 races and the longest winless streak in the team's history. As Berger explained to Ferrari gearbox specialist Gordon Kimball what had gone wrong, Piquet finished lap 3, and the race began to settle down a little. The two Benettons were now running together in 4th and 5th, with Johansson 6th, and Patrese, Cheever, Warwick and De Cesaris forming a double-decker Brabham Arrows sandwich behind them. Piquet was pulling away from Alboreto, who now had Prost right behind, as the two 1985 title rivals renewed their acquaintance, while Patrese started dropping back with clutch problems and disappeared entirely on lap 5. Boutsen also dropped behind Fabi and soon lost another place to Johansson. For several laps, Prost chased Alboreto until just after Warwick cruised in to retire with a punctured radiator, he surged through at Les Combes as Alboreto's transmission broke. At exactly the same moment, and completely unnoticed by the cameras, Piquet also slowed and Prost swept past into the lead, followed by Teo Fabi. Nelson's Williams had cracked an exhaust, and it wasn't until Prost had crossed the line first, to finish his 10th lap, that anyone apparently noticed Piquet was missing. Both Williamses came into the pits together, Nigel for tyres and Nelson to have his car looked at. After some tinkering, he went back out, popped and banged his way around for a lap and then gave it up as a bad job. So on lap 12, Prost led Fabi, Johansson, Boutsen, De Cesaris and Cheever, and the field was stringing out. Prost started easing away from Fabi, safe in the knowledge that 3 of his major rivals were already out of the running. Capelli's Ford engine expired when he was leading the 3.5 litre class, though in fact he was driving the spare after his race car conked out in the warm-up, and the spare didn't actually carry enough fuel to finish the race anyway. Johansson moved up to second past Fabi on lap 17, and just out of the points and mostly off camera, there was a lively 3-way scrap between Arnoux, Brundle, who was missing a chunk of nose cone, and Nakajima in the camera-equipped Lotus. They all moved up one when Boutsen came in with a smoking wheel bearing. Prost, by now, had a lead of about 18 seconds, and came in for his scheduled tyre stop, emerging from the pit lane just in front of Johansson and Fabi, and Stefan dutifully slotted in behind, rather than swarming past the cold-tired number 1 car. Behind the leading trio, Andrea De Cesaris had now made his way up into 4th, while Brundle had an overheating event in his Zack-speed, and Prost lapped 6th place Nakajima. By about half distance, Johansson and Fabi had also stopped and returned to the track, still second and third, though the Benetton's engine was beginning to sound distinctly sickly and de Cesaris was reeling him in, and on lap 31 the Brabham was passed at the bus stop. Fabi's race was run on lap 35 as his engine finally gave up the ghost, and that was about it for interest, as Prost's main problem was combating boredom as he slowed to 4 seconds off his fastest pace to cruise home. So Alain Prost took win number 27, equalling the record of Jackie Stewart, who was in the stands to see, with Stefan Johansson some 25 seconds back in second place to make it a McLaren 1-2. Andrea de Cesaris, running third, coughed to a halt just short of the line out of fuel and hopped out and pushed his Brabham across the finish to stand on the podium for the first time since the last race of 1983. With Eddie Cheever fourth, Satoru Nakajima fifth, and the only Honda running, and Arnoux taking his first point of the year in 6th. Piercarlo Ghinzani was 7th and also ran out of fuel, with Alio, Streff and Fabre taking the 3.5 litre points. It had been by no means a classic race, but McLaren and Andrea de Cesaris wouldn't complain, with Johansson now moving up to second in the title race on the back of his consistent form. Long faces at Williams and Ferrari though, and Senna left to rue what might have been as the teams prepared for the Monaco race in 2 weeks' time.